You give me a 3, 2, 1, and I'll know we're going.
3, 2, 1.
Today is March 15th, 2024. We are interviewing Robert Atlas. My name is Esther Finder. Mr. Atlas is in Fort Lee, New Jersey. I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English.
Right.
And 3, 2, 1.
Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, sir, and can you please spell it?
Robert Atlas, A-T-L-A-S.
And what was your name at birth, and can you spell that?
At birth, it was Avraham Abba Atlas. The last name was the same. The first name kept on changing. What happened is, during the war, I had to have a Christian name. So the name was changed to Zdzisław, Z-D-Z-I-S-L-A-W, Zdzisław. And then when I came back after the war, I was rescued by my parents, the name stayed Zdzisław in first grade and then in third grade in Poland. And once I ended up in France, they couldn't pronounce the Zdzisław, so they said, do you mind if we call it you Ladislav, L-A-D-A-S-L-A-V? So I said, that's fine with me. Came to the United States, the L became a Y, and I became a Yadislav. Somebody misread it. Until I got my citizenship paper, when the judge asked me, is this your first name? So I say, yes. And he looked at it, said, well, it's a hard name. So you want to keep it? So I said, can I change it? So he says, absolutely. When? What do I have to do? So he says, just tell me, what do you want to be called? So I say, how about Robert? Since then, I haven't figured it out why I chose Robert. I must have either seen an actor with the name, first name Robert, or read a book with the name of Robert. And it stuck, never changed. So that's the story of my first name.
Where were you born?
I was born in Rzeszów. That's another interesting town, R-Z-E-S-Z-O-W, southern France, almost by the Czech border. It was a small town before World War I. It had 45,000 people. Right now, it has over 200,000. It has an airport, which we didn't have. It has a university, which didn't have. And now it's on the border of Ukraine almost, because the borders change.
I'm sorry, what country did you say?
What is this?
What country did you say?
In Poland. The country was Poland, southern Poland.
And when were you born?
Why what?
When were you born?
I was born September 1st, 1936. Actually, it wasn't September 1st, but my mother figured it out later. It should have been September 9th, but I guess she thought of World War II, which was September 1st, 1939, was started when Germany invaded Poland. So she remembered September 1st, and then she says, let's change it. So I say, well, I already have a couple of pieces of paper from Poland and France, and it says on all of them September 1st. Let's keep it September 1st. It's good enough for me.
And how old are you, sir?
I am 87 now, going on 88.
You started to tell us about your hometown. Can you tell us about the Jewish community in your town?
The Jewish community was 15,000, 35% of the population before World War I. During the war, when Germany invaded Poland, my town was invaded on the 8th of September of 39. And for about 2-3 years, we lived where we always lived. My grandmother used to take care of me because my mother worked for my grandmother and grandfather. My grandfather had a hardware store, and my mother was working for him as a bookkeeper. And then in 1942, beginning of 42, the Germans created a ghetto, which means they took all the Jews from the whole area of Rzeszów and moved them in a certain small area. And I was in that ghetto for about 6 months, maybe 8 months. Yes.
I'm going to ask you to hold off on that. I have a few questions before we get to the ghetto.
Okay.
Okay, you're just running a little bit ahead of me. What was your father's name?
My father was Israel Atlas. Izzy.
And where was he born?
He was born in Rzeszów. However, when he was born, it wasn't Poland. It was Austria-Hungary. He was born before World War I. There was no Poland then.
And what work did he do?
He was a lawyer, advocate, which he never really liked, but he wanted to study chemistry, but there was a quota system then in Poland. And chemistry, there were too many Jews applying for it. He would have had to study in a different country. So his parents said, what's the difference? Why don't you just become something else? Became a lawyer, so he became a lawyer.
What do you know about his family?
I have many more pictures from his family. Somehow he managed to get back after the war from his friends than from my parents, my mother's side. They had a store, which I think was a grocery store. I don't know how big it is. They were much more religious on my father's side than my mother's side. My mother's side, I have one single picture of them. And neither my grandfather nor anybody else in that picture wears a kippah, which was a yarmulke. And he wasn't as religious. That was my mother's side. My father's side, more religious.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name? Amelia, A-M-A-L-I-A, O'Malley, Malka, which is the queen in Hebrew. And my father, Amelia, Malusha, Lucia. So he called her Lucia. You know, it's the same way like in the United States where Bob is from Robert. You know, if you keep on changing it, you get a slightly different name.
Where was she born?
She was also born in Rzeszów.
What work did she do?
What did she do?
Yeah, what work did she do?
She was a bookkeeper. She was very smart. Unfortunately, she was a woman, and a woman never got a chance to go to school. She never even finished high school because her father needed her in the store. And she could run the business. And later on, I found out from other people who knew her that she was the one who was the brains behind the business. She used to give credit to people, make sure and she got some education where my grandfather hired a teacher for her, and she studied just with a teacher a little bit.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No brothers, no sisters. I asked my father once, how come I didn't have any brothers? I was very lonely. I wanted a brother for a special reason. Later on, I'll tell you why. What happened is he tells me, he says, well, there was the war and I was too old after the war, which was probably not his real reason. Maybe he didn't want to have any children because of what happened. The reason I wanted a brother or a sister is it would be a generation that would stand with me against my parents. We would have somebody, I would have somebody in common who could side on my side rather than being a lonely person who was always bypassed since I was younger. You didn't suffer. Don't worry about the past. I never got any answers to any of my questions, although my father was sometimes when I pushed him was more forward and he would say things where my mother didn't want to talk about the past.
We can explore this a bit more later. We'll
Sorry.
definitely come back. We'll come back to this
Okay.
topic, what you're saying now. It's very interesting. What do you know about the religious traditions that your family observed before the war?
Before the war, they observed them. After the war, the observation was very small. Whatever religion I got it myself, probably much more. And if there is such a thing as going to temple or to synagogue, I was probably going much more often than my father and mother. I did ask my father at one time, did you lose your religion because of World War II, because of the war, of what happened? So he told me, he says, truthfully, no. By the time I was 16, I was not religious anymore. To me, it looks like a lot of nonsense to him. So he was not religious. And at least he told me the truth, that it wasn't the war that created this problem with him.
What are some of your personal earliest memories?
Before the war, I don't remember much, except being at my grandmother on my mother's side the whole day playing there. And then when the store was closed, my mother was right across the street, would pick me up and she would take me to where we lived with my father and my mother and myself. During the war, I remember being in the ghetto for a short period of time. Some memories are vague, and I sometimes wonder whether I really saw them or was it because I read about certain things. So for instance, running where you were, the Germans would tell you, aus, raus, 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 get out, get out. And everybody was running to a place where there were many people. And I seem to recall, I think I saw it, where they took once a baby and they threw it in the air and they shot the baby in the air. I do remember staying in the house when my parents would go to work. They told me in the apartment, don't go out. When they call you Juden raus, Jews, get out. Don't go out, don't open the door, hide. And I was in that room the whole day, and there was a horse on which I was riding the horse. I was only about 4 and a half, 5. And the horse, and there were a lot of cigarette butts. And I remember, because other people live in the same apartment, different rooms, I would pick up the butt and I would stick it in the mouth of the horse, and it never came out. And I couldn't figure out, that was a big idea, what did the horse do with these cigarettes? And in the evening they would come. The other memory I have of the ghetto is one day my father comes home and tells my mother, they caught my parents. And I knew exactly what it meant. I would never see my grandparents anymore on my father's side, because before that, I stopped seeing the grandparents on my mother's side. They disappeared. So now my father's side disappeared. While in the ghetto, my mother and father taught me to be prepared. I would become a Catholic, and I had a story to remember. Basically, I spoke Polish, and I didn't look Jewish. So the Polish language saved me to a great extent. But what I had to remember is this. We're going to place you someplace with somebody, Catholic family. Your mother is in a sanatorium. Your father has been taken prisoner of war. Those two people, it's going to be your aunt and your grandmother. And I prepared all of this, and I had to learn. And then one day, my father made arrangements when he was outside of the ghetto. They were always working outside of the ghetto, coming back in the evening to the ghetto, that they were going to smuggle me out. So in the morning, I walked between men, a group of men who were led across through the gate. And as we turned in the Catholic section of Rzeszów, where I lived, my father, who was holding me, and I was inside between a couple of men, pushed me to the left. And then as he pushed me to the left, a man grabbed my hand. Later on, after the war, I found out the man who grabbed my hand was Mr. Mazurek. He was a friend of my grandfather's on my mother's side. He used to deal in hardware also with him. He placed me in a small town called Ropczyce.
Before I have you completely out of the ghetto, I have one or two more questions about the ghetto itself.
Okay.
Can you please explain what were the conditions inside the ghetto? Living conditions, food, medical care, what can you remember?
I don't remember any. Food was low. They didn't give you, portions were low, but I don't remember that. My worst memory was loneliness, being stuck the whole day in that room, not walking out, not making a sound. I don't remember whether I ate anything or not, but that didn't bother me. But it was always being lonely by myself, waiting for my parents to come in. So the idea of being outside of the ghetto gave me a certain freedom, which was almost unbelievable. And when I think now to what was then, I didn't like being outside of the ghetto on a farm, but it was beautiful because I didn't have to go to school. I never went to see a doctor. I would walk barefoot in the summer, so I would be like the other people. So my memories of ghettos are running, raus, raus, Juden, get out of here. Maybe it happened 2 or 3 times, and then they would take certain people out and other people would go back to their apartments, to their home. I don't remember being hungry, but I do remember being lonely and being very afraid of making any noise and worrying about my parents.
What did your parents say to you about why you had to leave or what was going to happen to you? I mean, they prepared you, obviously. How did they explain this to you as a child?
They didn't. When I was a child, there was the war is going to end soon. Don't worry. I was pushed. I was too small in their own minds. I was too small to understand the facts, supposedly. Which is not true, because a young person can get hurt also, is afraid, has the same everything as an older person, but they cannot express it maybe. But it was always, even after the war, they would say, if I want to voice my opinion of something, it would be, what do you know? You know, it was one of those things. What do you know? You're too small, you're too young to have suffered, as if though only adults suffer and young people don't suffer, which was wrong.
A few moments ago, you mentioned that you tried to talk to your parents later.
Later, yes.
Okay, and we'll get to that, but I have one specific question. Did your parents ever explain to you why they got you out when they did? Was there some catalyst?
Why they got me out of the ghetto?
When they did.
Why they did it?
What prompted them?
Okay.
To
What
do
brought
all
it
of
in
this?
is, it was very interesting. I thought it was my mother's idea. And it was many, many years later, after my father was dead and my mother was getting up in age, and I was about 57, 59, that I decided to go to my mother and say, I want to thank you for saving me. And my mother said, I didn't save you. It was my younger sister, Rose, who was then about 18, who insisted that we try to at least save you as a young child. Let him live. Ruja never survived. She was killed during World War II. And of course, after I heard it, I said to her, to my mother, this was when I was 57, why didn't you tell me all those years that it wasn't, I always thought it was your idea and my father's idea of saving me. So he says, well, I didn't want to bring up problems. I stopped the conversation immediately because I didn't know whether she was ashamed that it wasn't her idea but her younger sister, or because she was willing to part herself with me. In other words, basically, you can look at it, I could look at it as she abandoned me and she gave me away, you know. So we never discussed it. And later on, I wrote a little article which I mentioned. After I spoke to her all those things, I made a mistake. Instead of saying, thank you for saving me, I should have said, thank you for saving me, but thank you for also saving yourself. So I would not become, in 1944, an 8-year-old orphan, that I would still have a mother. I should have said that to her, but I never got a chance to say it.
Is there anything else about your time in the ghetto or even before the ghetto that comes to mind before we leave the ghetto? Anything else to add?
No, not really. No. Things about the ghetto, I'm afraid to say it because did I really see a child thrown in the air and then shot? I know those things happened, but did I see it? And I'm not sure. Memory is a strange thing. We remember certain things and we try to forget certain things which are painful to us. And we don't want to remember them. And my mother especially was never helpful about remembering. When I would say, let's watch a show, a Shoah by Claude Lanzmann, who made a long story, she says, why should you look to the past? Forget about the past, look to the future. Unfortunately, the future is always based on the past, and what you do is how you are affected by the past, which affects your future. So those things are not easy to deal with.
Okay, let's pick up where you left us before. You walked out of the ghetto,
Right.
and somebody pick up
Yeah.
the story from there. What happened next?
So he took me, Mr. Mazurek took me to his house for about a couple of days or maybe a week. Later on, after the war, I found out the reason he couldn't keep me because other people from Rzeszów used to recognize me. And they say, isn't that the son of the Atlases? So he found a place on a farm which was not in the town of Rovčice, but away. One of the last farms which could be close to Rovčice, but it was on a farm. On the farm lived two women. One was a younger one, which I called Aunt, and one was an older one, which I called Grandma. The farm was very, how shall I say, rustic, poor. They didn't have a cow, but they had goats, 2 goats. They had a cat, no dog, rabbits, and they had chicken. Chicken were there for the eggs. One thing I learned a lot on the farm is that once the chicken stops laying eggs, it is worthless to the farmer. That's the end of the chicken. It is sold as meat. Also, to lay the eggs, which are fertilized, they need a rooster. And a rooster, that farm did not have a rooster. So they used to rent or borrow a rooster from another farmer. The rooster would come in, and it was terrible noise every morning. They make funny noises, but the eggs would be fertilized. Once the eggs is fertilized, you can see it under the light whether this is fertilized. And they would have the chicken. They would bring the chicken from the chicken coop to the place where the people lived, and the chicken was sitting on the eggs, and basically with us. So what does the farm consist of? 4 compartments. On the right, where the people live. On the left, the coop, the chicken, the goats. Upstairs, they kept hay, and in the basement was the cellar, root cellar, potatoes, beets, carrots. When the goat would give birth to a baby goat, the whole idea was to make sure that you got still some milk. So you would compete between the baby goat and yourself, and you try to get to the goat very early. So you would milk the goat, and you could have some milk for the farm. The people lived, it was a 1 room. What did the room consist of? Living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom, 1 room with a tall place where they would heat the food. You would get the heat for the room. The floor was clay, so you would walk. As I mentioned before, in the summer, I had to walk barefoot outside, so I would be like all the other Christian or Catholic boys. And you worked according to the light. In other words, there was no electricity, but there was a kerosene thing which you used for a while, and then you would go to bed and sleep. The outhouse was an outhouse. You had to go outside to a thing, and you would dig a hole, and every so often you would scoop it up and use it as fertilizer for the other things that you grew. The water you would get from a well, you would go down and you would do the water. First you would drink it, you would use it to wash it, and then you would use it to wash the floor or whatever other things. So the water was reused. Everything was used as often as you can, reused as often. The outside, I remember the outside, they had a cherry tree. And the reason I remember is because I fell off the tree. What happened, I was going on a tree and with another boy from another farm, and we would pick cherries and we would eat them and spit out the pits. Now, after a while, the cherries were not here, but further out, higher up or further out. Now, the problem with further out is the branches get weak. As you go further and further out, eventually you reach a point where the thing breaks. I fell down. I remember I was afraid of making any noise. I couldn't walk. So the boy went to the farm, to the house, to tell them that I fell. They took me in, and I didn't go to a doctor for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. I couldn't walk until I got better. So that was the story of the cherry tree. Yes.
Can you give us a name of the people who took you in? Do you
No,
remember their
no, I
names?
don't. But what happened is we used to correspond with them after the war. My parents used to send them money and other things. But when we lived in France in 46, 47, 48, when they would get letters from the West, Poland became communistic. They would ask him a lot of questions, and they told my mother, please don't send any letters anymore to us. I wish I could have found them. I don't know their name. I wish I could have thanked them for saving me. They were very good people to me. Every Sunday, they would take me to church with them. Somebody would pass horse and buggy, and we would sit in the carriage and go to the church. I learned how to pray in Polish. I used to eat blueberries, just picking them from whatever they grew and eat them like that. I learned about animals. I learned that a cat, once she gives birth to other kittens, will not allow you to take the kitten into the room until she's ready to show it. She would then grab it by the neck and carry the kitten with her teeth to you to introduce you to the kittens. So there was a lot of stuff that I learned on the farm. Now, every so often, I had to supposedly go to visit my parents or my mother. So the man, Mr. Mazurek, would come over, pick me up, and take me. And I remember two different places I was taken. Once I was taken to another farm, and the reason I remember that is I walked on a beehive or something, and by the time I reached the farm, I was running. I was bitten thoroughly by the bees. So this was, and I stayed on a farm once. Once I stayed in a building in a town. I don't remember what town, but I remember I was scared. I was there the whole day. The people who were there left me for the whole day. And I was lonely and I was afraid. And there was a ledge. So I opened up the window and they told me to be quiet, not to. And I knew why, because people would ask questions. So what happened, and next persons heard me cry, and I walked over the ledge and I walked over to the next apartment. When they came in the evening, they didn't find me in the apartment. So when they picked me up, I forgot how I came back to the apartment. They gave me a beating, so I remember that story. There were other things. Every couple of months I went. And then when I came back, I had a story where I went to see my mother. She was still in a sanatorium. I didn't know where my father was, prisoner of war. My mother couldn't take care of me. But hopefully next time, maybe she'll get better and I'll go back with my mother. And that's how I lived for 2.5 years on a farm. As I said, memories now, I think of it. I must have been in heaven. I didn't have to go to school until I was 8 years old. And I didn't ever saw a doctor. It was nothing but play. Yet it wasn't play. There was a certain thing. I was very afraid of giving away my story. During the day, I could remember it. So I had to distinguish at night. At night, I was afraid to fall asleep because I was afraid what happens if I start talking in my sleep and I tell them my whole story that I'm Jewish, that this, that. So I taught myself how to stay awake. How did I teach myself how to stay awake? I would make noises. I would suck on my tongue, like this, suck on my tongue to wake myself up. Of course, quite a few times I peed, I wet myself because I was afraid. So I would try to keep the night, to differentiate the night from the day. It wasn't easy, but I managed, the same way as I differentiated myself as a Catholic from a Jew. So that was my story of the living on a farm.
Were you homesick for your parents?
I'm
Did you want to see your parents?
When did I see my
Were you-
parents?
Were you homesick for your parents? Did
Yes,
you want to
I
see
was
them?
homesick for my parents. Don't forget, they told me a story. Don't forget, the war is going to end soon. We're going to pick you up soon. A week became a month became a year became 2 years. I didn't see, yes, I was very homesick. And whenever I see Mr. Mazurek, who would pick me up, take me someplace, he would always tell me, don't worry, your mother is safe, your mother is safe, your father is safe. Later on, after the war, I found out that my father forced my mother, about a month later maybe or so, forced my mother to get out of the ghetto, and Mr. Mazurek took her and put her on another farm closer to Rzeszów, not Robczyce, Niechów, Mogilnica. I don't know how to spell it. So they put him on the farm, and since she was an adult, she stayed in the attic of the farm. The only time she would get out of the attic, I found out that from her and from my father, is when they knew that the Germans would come through the farms, try to grab the Jews if they could. So they would took her to a forest, they made a hole, they covered the hole in the forest, and she would stay in the forest for a day until the Germans passed by the farm, and then they would pick her up and bring her back to the attic where she stayed for almost 2 years also, a little bit less. In other words, she escaped after I did because my father said, you should be alive at least. My father never escaped from the ghetto till the end. He made himself a key when he saw there was only about 100 people or so left, made himself a key and got out, but he got caught, he got beaten, and he got paralysis of the mouth. They beat him up. So immediately he made himself another key. He says, if I don't get out, they're going to shoot me. It's a matter of just time. So he made himself a key again, and he escaped into the forest. He was in the forest for about 3 or 4 weeks, very short period of time. The Russian front moved, and he was liberated first. And then my mother was liberated. And then I was liberated. I was further west. It took some time because the Russian front and the German front stopped. And I was stuck on a farm when the front was going back and forth. And I remember on the farm, they dug up a communal hole in the earth where they would, during the night, during the day, they would hide because they were afraid a bomb would fall either from the Russian side or from the German side. And then in 1944, my mother came to pick me up. I remember I was called in, and my aunt, so-called aunt, says, "Do you know who this lady is?" I did not recognize my mother, but she had a wonderful smile. And she says, "Well, do you think who this lady is?" And I said, "My mother," like with a question mark. And she smiled, and we hugged, and we kissed. And I wanted to stay. I didn't want to leave the people. Can we stay over? Can we stay overnight, or 2 nights, or 3 nights? And my mother says, "No, no, no, your father is waiting for you." And I guess she made the right decision. Don't procrastinate, and don't make it harder than what it is. The same day, we came back to Rzeszów, and the way means of transportation then were Russian trucks would take the soldiers one way and come back empty the other way. So whenever the empty truck would be, you would just kind of grab them and they would come back. And I came back to Rzeszów. And I wore, by the way, when I was on the farm, I wore the saint, not a cross, but a saint's medal, a medal. And I used to cross myself and say the prayer in front of a cross on the farm. And when I came back home with my parents, I said, "Where is the cross?" I asked my mother. After 2 years, you kind of mixed up. You don't know what it is. So my mother said, she didn't want to scare me. She says, "Well, we just moved in. It's going to take us a while to do certain things." After a while, I started remembering, and I took the medal off and I gave it to her. In other words, I remembered that I was Jewish. So.
You mentioned fighting between the Russians and the Germans. Did you witness any of the combat, or did you just hear it in the distance?
No, I was at a distance. I never witnessed anything, but I heard the bombs, and I know it lasted more than a night or 2 nights. It could have lasted for a week maybe, or maybe 2 weeks. Back and forth, because I remember going in this underground thing, and we were afraid that a bomb would fall on a farm and kill us. This way there was some protection. So that was...
What about your liberation? What do you remember of liberation?
Liberation. It's interesting. Sometimes you don't realize certain things until much later, how things runs. So I looked to the Russians as my saviors. They would walk as soldiers, they would hold hands. They used to steal watches. They used to love watches, the Russian soldiers. They would show you on their arms, they had 3, 4, 5 watches sometimes. Many years later, I went on a trip and I ended up in Hungary. Hungary was also liberated by the Russians. But the guide starts talking about the Russians. They came here and they molested our women. They raped the women. And I said to myself in my own head, is it possible? Are we talking of the same Russians? It's how you visualize. Sometimes the same person is 2 different things, and he acts or she acts 2 different ways towards 2 different people. And I realized then, much later in life, that you shouldn't be so quick to make judgments about people and about nations. So that... Now, we left Poland. How do we leave Poland? Yes.
Before we leave Poland, you talked about your reunion with your mother. What about your reunion with your father?
I'm at you.
I asked you about your reunion with your father.
Father, my father. So when I came, I didn't recognize him either, but my mother says that's your father. So I believed her, you know. But after a while, you know, certain things come back and you convince yourself. Strange things, even though you convince yourself, you go through life with certain fears. For instance, whenever my parents would leave me at home by myself after the war, which for me was in 1944 in Poland, they would leave me and they would come back. I was wondering, how do I know that the people that come back are the same people that left? You know, you get certain things, or how do I know that this is them? How do I know these are my parents? Every so often you go through this. You're afraid of losing them again, and you don't want that happened. So in 44, my father was asked, he was in Rzeszów, to defend a German guy that they caught in 44. So my father says, I'm a lawyer, you know, defense lawyer for the German. So my father says to them, how can I defend them? I'm Jewish. You know, they killed my family. They massacred. So they told him, just don't worry about it. We're going to hang him anyway immediately. But we need a defense. So he just stood up and he says, I hope the judge gives this man whatever he deserves justly. And he sat down. And sure enough, next day they hanged him, you know. So that's what the way it was done at the beginning, you know. Sometimes it's done in a rush. And then they had a pogrom in Rzeszów in 1945. I didn't finish my first grade, and I had to go. I was behind, as it is, I was behind schedule. So we moved from Rzeszów to Krakow, stayed there for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then we moved to Katowice, where I went for third grade. I skipped the second grade, and then I went for third grade, and I finished the third grade there. And in 46, we left Poland. Also, my father didn't like the communistic thing, because there were two sets of people who were running originally for the presidency. The one who was supported by the London and the one who was supported by Moscow. So first, the one who won was the one from London. 2 days later, they recounted the counts, and guess who won? It was the one who was from Moscow who won. He says, I see what they're doing. He says, so that was the one reason. The anti-Semitism was another reason. So we left. We got papers just to get out. And where could you get out? You could go to Czechoslovakia. Somehow or other, people closed their eyes and you got out, went to Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia had pleasant experiences because my mother thought that Czech and Polish are very similar. If you speak a little bit like a child, it sounds Czech. Unfortunately, she couldn't communicate with the Czechs. But they were nice enough. I remember that once she was asking for some directions and she couldn't get an answer, and he was trying and nothing. So he turned around. He was walking this way. He turned around, took her by the hand and walked her to where it was almost there. It was a pleasant experience that I remember, that somebody showed some heart to somebody who doesn't speak the language, which is very important sometimes.
Before we leave Poland, I have a couple more questions about your time in Poland after the war. Can you speak more about the anti-Semitism that you mentioned there was anti-Semitism, but
Yes.
can you elaborate on that?
Okay. The anti-Semitism in Rzeszów was, nobody was killed, but they beat up some people. It was Passover, and close to Passover, and the myth of you need the Christian blood to make matzahs. So that was used as this. People were beaten up. And I remember my father laughing because there were a couple of Poles, Christian Poles, who were beaten up also. They didn't know. They thought they were Jews. So that happened. So I never finished school in that time. My mother had to go back to get the paper for the third grade. Once the anti-Semitism later on morphed, where it changed, where Jews were moving in certain areas, they were coming back from Russia, 45. Certain Jews were in Russia because Russia invaded from the east and Germany invaded from the west, Poland. They divided Poland. And they were coming back, and there was a big pogrom in Kielce in 1946. And I remember my father saying, they don't want us here. We got to get out. And then he tried, and he got to Vienna. He could get papers, and to Czechoslovakia. The reason he went to Czechoslovakia because some other friend of his went to Czechoslovakia. Now, yes.
One more question about Poland before we leave. Maybe two more questions. You mentioned you were back in school. What was it like for you to go to start school after all that you had gone through?
I didn't feel any anti-Semitism per se. I just felt out of place in the sense that I was the oldest behind schedule. And even if I skipped second grade, I was in third grade, I was still behind schedule. I missed a lot. I didn't know a lot. Didn't know how to read, didn't know how to write. But I managed to learn. It's a big difference between first grade and third grade. First grade, you learn how to sing, how to doodle, how to write ABC. Third grade, you're more mature already, and you learn more interesting stuff. And the other thing I remember, I got caught, and it must have been in third grade. I decided one day to play hooky, not to go to school. And I had to have an excuse, so I wrote a memo to the teacher, not thinking that I would make mistakes all over the place. And I wrote, please excuse my son, that type of thing. He didn't feel well. And I wrote it, and of course, it was full of mistakes. The teacher was nice. I wish I would have remembered her name, but she's nice. She says, boy, Mrs. Atlas, your mother has a lot of problems writing, I see. She makes mistakes. I learned my lesson for the rest of my life. Never lie. Never try something because you're going to get caught one way or the other. It was an interesting experience learning procedure, what I learned in class, not from, writing on the board, blackboard, but simply telling me, you're full of shit. But she said it so nicely that I never forgot it. And I say, if there is one thing I'm never going to do in my life is lie, because I'm going to get caught.
Before I let you leave Poland, I want you to stop for a minute and think, is there anything else you want to share about your time in Poland?
Do I want to share anything from Poland and from the other thing I was going to tell you in Czechoslovakia, they didn't know it was temporary. So the Palestinian Jews were trying to take orphans. Evidently, Britain would allow them bring orphans to Palestine. This was 45. So my parents started discussing in front of me. Originally, they would discuss, by the way, in Yiddish, till the point where I started smiling. I understood what they were saying. And they decided to speak Polish, might as well speak Polish, or get out of the room, but they didn't want me to hear something. So they started discussing maybe we should let him go to Palestine, so at least he'll be settled. They didn't know where they were going to go. They couldn't stay long in Czechoslovakia. So I said, after I stayed for so many years without you, you're going to let me go? Says, I don't want to go. So they say, all right, forget it. Forget it. It was a lousy idea. So they never sent me to Palestine. So from there, we went to France. So what I want to share about Poland.
No, we'll do the photos later, sir.
Okay.
We do photos and documents later.
Document later, okay. So
Okay.
would I want to share anything else about France? We went to France. Okay. So from Czechoslovakia, we went to France, temporary. And in France, as a foreigner, as a Pole, you weren't allowed to work. However, French people are very understanding. They close their eyes to certain things, you know. Yeah, we never saw it. So how do they have so many foreigners living in France, not working and living? What are the means? Black market. Black market was fantastic. And everybody made a living of it, including the French police force. Because every so often they caught you. Whatever you had in your apartment or with you, they would confiscate. They say, don't do that anymore. They would go to the right and you would go to the left and you would continue in your own business. And everything was fine. And then suddenly in 1947 or 48, there was a problem between Poland and France. Poland threw out the French ambassador. France threw out the Polish ambassador. We were getting, every couple of weeks, we were going to the police station, renew my temporary permit so I can stay here. And they said, oh, you're Polish. Sorry, you can't stay. So my parents said, so what do I have to do to stay here? So, you know, declare yourself stateless. There was an American guy who used to go there. He was a soldier after World War II. He used to go through Europe. And he says, everybody, there was tremendous number of people moving across from east to west, all countries, all nationalities, religions. And he says, let's declare yourself stateless. So the policeman said to my mother, why don't you declare yourself stateless? So what do I have to do? Nothing. Say you're stateless. I'm stateless. Good. Now you can stay. You know, and then there was another policeman later on when she came to renew the thing again, who said, why don't you come to talk to me? He says, you know, we can discuss, meaning you give me something and I'll give you some longer. I'll give you for 3 months temporary visa. Now, the interesting thing was we were stateless to the French people, to the American people, which we wanted to move here. My mother wanted to move here because she had an uncle living in the United States. We were Polish citizen. Polish citizen, there was a quota. 1924, United States put a quota on different countries, depending how many people lived in the United States. So many could come from those different countries. So I have a piece of document written in the United States, which is very unusual. In one area it says we're stateless. However, we were not accepted here as stateless. We were accepted as Polish citizens. So we stayed in France like that for 5 years, temporary visa, until it came. If we wouldn't have gotten it, the affidavit from the United States, I would have ended up in Australia because I have another permit. Australia was different. Australia was willing to take the white man. They didn't care. You're Jewish, you're not Jewish. They were afraid of the Chinese. Australia was too close, China, and they were moving, so that the yellow race, they were afraid of the yellow race, they used to call them. White race will take, yellow race we don't want. So we got this, but 6 months before it expired, we got the one coming to the United States. My father was willing to go to Israel. My mother was not. She was shot. She says, I want to live with I don't want to worry about Israel, 48. Let's go to the United States. So we came to the United States. I came to the United States and I lived HIAS, Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, took us in downtown Manhattan, 425 Lafayette. It's funny, you remember certain addresses, Lafayette Street. And every Saturday and Sunday, we would go out and would meet other Jews who came earlier from other countries, other places. And they would come and they would ask you, did you know this guy? Did you know that guy from this city, that country, this country? Trying to find family. We did it to a certain degree in Europe also, in a Jewish area where you would ask, did you know somebody? You try to find out something, whatever you could. It wasn't easy. And anyway, so that was this. And since I was there, my mother wanted to put me, Stuyvesant High School is nearby, very good high school. She discovered, somebody told her, Stuyvesant High School is very good. There was only one problem. Stuyvesant High School required you to know the language and math. So they gave me a test in math. The math I passed, the language I flunked, and they said, when you learn English, you can come back here. So I ended up in Seward Park High School, where all the foreigners lived or came, in Seward Park High School. That was the guy who bought, I think, Alaska. And by then, once I learned English, my mother says, why don't you go to Stuyvesant? I say, forget it, what's the difference? One high school is like another high school. So the other interesting thing that my mother also learned is, since she knew I was going to be behind schedule and everything, when we were still in France, she says, you're going to skip one grade in high school. She says, what do you mean? She says, in the summer, you're going to take the most important thing, which was language, mathematics, history, and French. And then you take a test. And I took a test, and instead of going in France, you go from 6th grade to 5th grade to 4th grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade. You go backwards. So what happened is she, instead of going from 4th grade, I went to 6th grade and 5th grade. Instead of going to 4th grade, I skipped and I went to 3rd grade. I was a lousy student for about 3 months, but it didn't matter. My paper said that I finished that. So when I came here, they could put me. Of course, came here. I was behind schedule again. I ended up taking beginner's English. And I knew some English, very little, which I took for about a year in France. And I remember I was sitting in French. I took French last thing. And it was the teacher never called on me. And she asked me to translate from English to French, which was the easy way, rather than French to English. French to English would have been the hard way. So I started getting up and I started translating. And she says, boy, your French is very good. She says, where did you learn it? So I say, in France. She says, oh yeah, sit down. She thought I was making fun of her because I never said boo in one word in the class. I was sitting like, So I finished high school and I went to college and I studied electrical engineering. And when I got my papers, I said that, I mentioned, the judge said, He called me Robert. He wanted to know what I want to be called. I said Robert. Robert is fine. Yes.
I'd like to go back and cover a few things that we didn't discuss yet. When did you and your family begin to realize what had happened to the other Jews, the other members of your family, your neighbors? When did the
When we
scope
realized,
of this happen? Yeah, when did you realize?
we realized in 44 already, 45 immediately, because there was some people who came back from Russia, you know, they were coming east since they were, Poland was invaded from the east by the Russians, and then when the Russians were attacked by the Germans in 41, they took the Jews, the Polish Jews especially, because they didn't trust them. Talking about trust, you know, the Russians didn't trust the Polish Jews, the Germans didn't trust any Jews, you know. So so they took them first, moved them further east to the Urals, to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, you know, all the Turkestan. So some of them end up. And so we realized then, and some of the Jews went through Persia to Palestine during the war, and some of them came back east, going back to Rzeszów to find out, did anybody is alive from my family? Did anybody see it? Sometimes you were lucky and you found out somebody, oh yeah, I saw your uncle, I saw your cousin. Most of the time you were not lucky, but they disappeared. And they didn't reappear. And you would leave pieces of paper. Mr. So-and-so from this town, so-and-so, was this place at this time. If you have, send them a response to this, that place, Jewish organization here and there. Also in France, I learned certain things which I never knew. I was in camp one day and I spoke to one boy and he got on my nerve because he would speak first Russian, then he would switch to Yiddish, then he would switch to Polish, then he would switch to French. And I said something and I found out that both his parents were not alive and he was being taken care of by the Jewish organization. I felt very bad when I felt such animosity because the poor kid couldn't speak in one language for more than 2-3 minutes, you know. So again, don't prejudge people unless you hear their stories first.
And 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we are back.
Okay.
I had asked you about your grandparents. Did you find out what happened to them?
No, I don't know. However, knowing the history, most of them ended up in Belzec. There were certain times where they were moved to Belzec. My aunt ended up in Auschwitz. She was the only one with her 2 sons. That was the sister of my father. And they would still write at that time. They could still write. And her husband, my uncle, through marriage, was alive till the end of the war. He was in a bunker. We found out from some other people who were in the bunker with him. And they said, the bombing is terrible. Let's get out of here. They got out. Most of them got out. Some of them stayed in the bunker. And it was a shell, I don't know which shell, German or Russian, that ended up on a bunker that was talking about destiny. You know, the one who protects himself who was in the bunker, ends up by being killed, and the others were alive. I know my father was angry at my aunt, at his sister, for quite a while, because in 1939 she went to put money in Switzerland, and she was told when she was in Switzerland things didn't look too good between Germany and Poland. Germany was moving further east continuously, and she was told to stay in Switzerland, don't come back. It was like 3 months before the war ended. She came back and she got killed, and so did my first two cousins. Yeah, but we never discovered. I looked for quite a while on all kinds of websites. If I can find somebody who is alive, you always think that it's possible. And sometimes it is possible, but most of the time it doesn't happen. So they counted how many people were killed, and between my father and my mother, close family, was 68 people who were killed. And you get information, different ways. Like my father was alive, so he collected some pictures from his friends in Rzeszów who had. My mother had only one picture of her, and I remember I said, "Let me make a copy of it." There was her plus my grandparents. That was the only picture I have of my grandparents on my mother's side. She wouldn't let me have it. She says, no, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it. No, she didn't let me have it. She died. And then I got a copy, and then I got the original, and I made a copy. That's how pictures were important. The reason you didn't keep them is because if they caught you with a picture, you gave away the whole family. Then they recognized the whole family. So there was many reasons not to keep any papers, any pictures.
When we were talking before about you coming to America, I did not have a chance to ask you, what were your expectations of the United States and what were your first impressions?
First of all, there was a tremendous difference between France and the United States. One of them was you can come here to the United States, and then you can go and live in Nevada or in California or in Florida without notifying the police. In France, if you wanted to move from point A to point B, you had to go to the police station. You had to ask permission. And this was even before I was a citizen. One thing that was interesting is I remember once, can I travel? One once asked in here. So they say, yes, you can travel any place you want, but you have to realize one thing. Don't go to Poland because you're young. And if you're young, they still consider you a citizen of Poland. They can grab you in the army, and there is no way we can stop them. So there was a tremendous amount of freedom of saying something. In other countries, you had to be careful what you said, to whom you said, and how you said it. Antisemitism was very low. However, I had discussions with my wife when we got married. This was in 1960. Can this happen here? And I remember she was saying, never, never happened here. I think she has since then changed her mind to a great extent when I say anything can happen. But then again, she said other things which she couldn't believe. I remember when we were voting for Trump and who was it running? I forgot. Oh, she was running. Mrs. Clinton was running, I think, against Trump first time. And my wife says there's no way he can get elected. So I say, well, there are three choices that people vote, either one way or the other way, or they don't vote at all. And that's the problem to a certain degree. Is in the United States, people don't vote. What I liked is two parties here, which was fantastic because one party is in, one party is out. Living in France, I saw the balagan, the mixture. There were so many parties, and they were continuously on strike. Monday is the strike of drivers. Tuesday is the strike of garbage men. Thursday is the strike of this and the strike of that, continuously. And parties would change. Every 3 months, somebody else was in charge. The only one who was not in charge is Robert Schuman, who was the foreign minister. He managed to stay all along the same. The others were in and out, in and out. And of course, living in Poland during the war and after the war, between Nazism and communism, which was a one-party system, is not good either. Whatever I say, it's the most efficient system because whoever's in charge, when he says, let's do this, we do it. Right or wrong, we do it. Here we have a chance to change our minds, to discuss it, to make mistakes and correct them, to do things. Over there, you don't. And many parties is a mess. It's a mess in Israel with many parties. It's a mess in France, although lately European countries are moving toward the right. All the countries, whether it's Holland, what's his name, Gert, something or other, or whether it's France with Le Pen, or whether it's Italy, the woman, I forgot her name, they're moving to the right. Can we move to the right here? Maybe it's time that democracy is ending and we have nothing. But we have to learn how to take care not only of ourselves, but of the whole planet. And we don't think of it. There are two ways of building a bridge. The person who says, let's build a bridge and people will come to cross it, or the person who says, let's wait until everybody wants to cross the river and they discover they don't have a bridge. Oh, maybe we should have built it earlier. So there is a lot of problems, but it's still a wonderful country. Will it be like that forever? Who knows? I don't know. Yes.
You talked about your getting adjusted to the United States. What about your parents? What challenges did they have? How did they support themselves? What can you share with us about
my parents? It was much harder for them to get adjusted than for me. For instance, when I was getting married, I said I found out a girl, she's an American. And my mother started saying, American, oh boy, couldn't you find somebody from Europe? Preferably from my hometown, I said to her. And she started bringing up a thing. And then she asked, what does her father do? So finally I couldn't take it. I told her, I'm not marrying her father. It was like third degree I would get. They stuck among themselves, their own, preferably Polish Jews, preferably the ones from the same area. They were stuck. They didn't want to see differences. My father had a chance. He had a grocery store in a Greenpoint, which was a Polish section, and a guy was a lawyer there. She says, oh, you know Polish law. I can use you as a lawyer, not to go in front of the bar because he would have to nostrificate, go through the bar again. But so my father said, I'm too old. I'm this, I don't want to do it, My mother wanted him to do it. It would be easier than a grocery store. He didn't do it. So it was harder for them than for me. I at least managed to get some friends. However, I still stuck with two friends that I had that I met in 1952 in the high school, where suddenly I heard two people speak to each other Polish. So I got closer and closer. I heard them speaking Polish, and we became friendly, and we stayed friends for all those years. They passed away, unfortunately, and I miss them. But it's easier for a younger person to change than for an older person to change. Stubbornness, used to it. I mean, certain thing. My father said something that hit me. Took me years to realize what he meant. He said once, "The chicken doesn't taste the same way as when I was young." And I look at him, "Dad, the chicken is a chicken. What's the difference?" I realized that what he meant is he was young. He felt differently about life when he got older. So,
What did people here ask you about your time in Europe during the war?
well, whenever I speak, I usually speak in front of a high school or elementary school, sometimes adults. I try to always ask, what's the population of the ones who are hearing me? You don't want to go to a 12-year-old, tell them that I saw a child thrown in the air and being shot. You don't want to give them a nightmare, scare them. You want to bring it up. If you do it slowly. I try to explain the differences between things, that it's nice to have differences. So I say sometimes to a child who is 10 years old, 12 years old, I say, imagine if all you had is black sneakers, that's all, and everybody in this whole world wore black sneakers. Wouldn't it be depressing? Isn't it nice that we also have gray sneakers and blue sneakers and yellow sneakers and green sneakers? The same thing as with people. Isn't it nice that we have people who are white and black and yellow, and they have different religions? It makes life interesting. You can discuss things. They see life from different point of view. Whether we'll be able to ever discuss them in the future, I was asked by a student once, "Are your parents alive?" They said no. So they're dead. If you could speak to them, what would you tell them? So for a moment I couldn't think. So then I said, I would tell them, "Dad, Mom, nothing really has changed since you left this earth." And let them figure out what it means for themselves. It can be taken many different ways.
How has your view of religion changed from when you were younger till today?
Personally, I don't think we need religion. However, religion is something which I don't understand. People who are religious, they have such strong beliefs that what I'm doing is right. I go through life questioning everything I do. Maybe that's not the right way to do it. Maybe religion, I know I got to go to the right, or believe. I have the same problem with who to vote for. I don't vote Republican or Democrat. I vote for a person because he or she stands for certain things. So I don't believe in religion. I do attend, or I attended when I was younger, much more often, because it made me a feeling I'm among my own. It was the same reason that I went stayed with friends who are from Poland. You know, something I know. I know what to expect from them.
Had you ever considered converting to Catholicism? You spent years.
Yeah. Well, when I was 18, 19, I went through a period of asking myself a lot of things. Maybe I should become a Catholic. You know, maybe majority is right. The heck with minorities. You know, you don't need it. Maybe I shouldn't get married and have children. After all, who wants to bring children into such a terrible world? Somehow or other, I came to the conclusion that I cannot break a chain. I owe something to my grandfather. I owe something to my great-grandfather. To my many grandfathers years ago, I owe something. They did something. I don't have the right to break that chain. And that's the reason I stayed Jewish. I got married. And I decided to have children. Maybe there's a better world. You know, and I got asked lately by my dentist something similar. What do you think after October 7th, what happened? This happened 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, and the dentist knows that I'm a survivor. What do you think? So I said, I don't know. And then when I was leaving, I came over to him. I said, you know, when I was 18, I decided to get married, to have children, to believe in the future. And now I have a granddaughter who got engaged. I hope I can be at her wedding. So I guess I still hope in the future. I still have hope.
In what ways do you think the Holocaust impacted your life and the choices you made?
Oh, it's changed my life completely. I don't have a brother, I don't have a sister. According to my father, I would have had something if the war that wasn't happened. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I wasn't brought up in the religion, which maybe I would have stayed. My father probably wouldn't have stayed. By the time he was 16, he said it was a lot of nonsense. He didn't need this. He knew the religion part, but he didn't believe in it. It made me question everything. What is right? What is wrong? Maybe that's not good. Maybe you have to know something. I did manage to accomplish things because I forced myself to push certain things in the back. There were some people who couldn't survive, who after the war killed themselves. You have many famous writers who killed themselves. I discovered it early in life when I was in France. A friend of my father comes in and he says, he stepped in front of the bus. Right in front, the bus was coming in, he stepped in front. He was this. And he says, I knew it, that it was going to happen. He didn't want to live, you know. So that a lot of them committed suicide. It takes courage to commit suicide. It's not something that you should do it. I don't know whether maybe it should be legalized. Maybe we should legalize end of death, you know, we don't suffer. Some countries have the, you know, where you decide, I've had enough, let me die. You shouldn't be a criminal, you know, I'm sick. And some states are doing this. I probably, if you ask me about this, I would have it that everybody has the right to reach a point where he or she may decide, I've lived long enough, let me die gracefully not being sick in bed, and not being a belonging, pulling down my children and my grandchildren. Do it the way the Indians used to do it, where once you reach a certain age, they would take you, put you underneath a tree, give you food, and he says, "Goodbye, father." And then you lived only as long as the food lasted, or until the animal came and ate you. So maybe that's the way. Maybe they were more advanced than we are, even though we look upon them as less advanced. They had an interesting idea of selling Manhattan for $24. It doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to everybody. I got that once when I took the ring for my wife and we had it cleaned. And the jeweler said, "Well, at one time it used to belong to somebody else. Now it belongs to your wife. Eventually it'll belong to somebody else again." So to grasp that idea of it is not yours permanently, maybe people wouldn't be so greedy, I also got it from a friend of mine where when we were moving, I was collecting boxes, packing boxes, and I told him how many boxes of books I have, how many boxes of this, boxes of that. And he told me, "Hey, Bob, in the end, all you need is one box." So maybe he's right. Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add about your survival or your parents' survival that we haven't discussed?
I belong to, now the group doesn't exist, Hidden Children Survivors. We used to meet. We used to help each other discussing. And sometimes the people who came in was really very upsetting, when you discover some woman who says to you, "I'm an orphan. I don't have a father and mother. And you are my witnesses. You are my family." It's upsetting. It's a nice feeling that she can acknowledge me as a family, having come from a different country, from a different area. That maybe we should try to globalize it. That idea of anybody can be your father, your mother, given the chance.
My last question. What message do you have for future viewers who will be watching this testimony?
First of all, keep on learning. Whenever you learn something interesting. It has an interesting point. Hope is the last thing that dies with you. You always have hope that it's going to get better. The person who has cancer and goes for all kinds of chemotherapy and things like that has hope. And yet we know that we're still at the stage where cancer can kill you. So we do have hope, and we do it anyway. And maybe I should give you a midrash that I once read. A man is about to die, and the angel of death comes around and tells him, "Get ready for this and this date, this and this place. You can't bring any luggage, but you can make yourself a big coat and stuff anything that you can bring into the pockets of the coat." So he makes himself a coat. At the appointed time, he puts in gold in one pocket, he puts silver in the other pocket, he could put food in the third pocket, and he goes to the appointed place. and he walks, and as he walks, he starts sinking in the mud. So he takes the gold and throws it out and lifts him up a little bit. Not enough. Takes the silver, throws it out, lifts him a little bit more. Finally, he takes the food and throws it out, lifts him a little bit more. And then an angel of life comes around and picks him up, takes him to God, and God tells him, don't you know that all you had to bring in is your good deeds of your life?
Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank
today.
you.
And I'm rolling, Mr. Atlas.
I want to finish this before my demise.
Okay, and we're rolling.
Okay.
Oh, please, who is with you now?
This is my wife, Marcia Atlas. She stood by me for 60-something years. And I sometimes asked her, maybe she should be the one who gives the talk about how to live with a Holocaust survivor. She says it's nothing different from a regular person. I don't believe her. I still don't believe her. There's got to be a difference. You know, so here is your chance, honey, to say a few words.
So we're married 63 years, and Bob never ceases to surprise me. Even at today's interview, I learned some new things, and the journey continues, and hopefully we'll continue on.
Well, we don't live forever.
Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
Can you tell us who are these people in this picture?
Yes, this is the picture on my mother's side, and my mother is the second one from the left. She's about 16, the way I figured it out by looking at the ages of her sisters. She's got 3 different sisters and a brother on her right, or completely on the left was her brother.
Can you give us first and last names, please?
They were called Kraut. Last name was Kraut, Kraut. And my mother was named Malka. Her brother was Wolf. The next one on the left, the third one from the left, was her sister Ruja. There was her father, my grandfather. His name was Moshe Rubin. Then there was the youngest one, the one who I'm alive because she was the one who insisted that I should be saved. Franya, my grandmother, her name was, I forgot. It'll come back to me. And then her oldest sister, Sala, who was married with 3 children. And my mother was married also. Eventually.
Do you know when this was taken or where?
It was taken in Rzeszów when 1922, roughly.
And what country?
Poland. Rzeszów, Poland.
And did you remember the name?
No,
Take
not
your
yet.
time. Take your time.
Leah?
I remember her maiden name, Keller, but I can't remember her first name.
Leah.
First name. Golda Atlas was the other one. Her name was
Okay.
can't remember. It'll come back someday.
Okay, thank you.
3, 2,
This is the
1.
earliest picture of me, Robert Atlas, as a baby in 1936, being held by my mother. On the back, my mother wrote down 1963, but evidently she was wrong. That much, 1936. So
And her full
and
name?
it was taken in Rzeszów, Poland. And my mother's name was Malka, Malka, the queen.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
Please tell us about this picture.
Okay, here I, Robert Atlas, am the baby who's laughing, being held by my nanny. But the interesting points are my two first cousins, the children of my aunt, Leah Atlas, who became Leah Zeisel. She was married. The one on the left is Lonek, Leon, and the one on the right is Isaac, Israel, my two first cousins who did not survive.
Do you know when and where this was taken?
This was taken in 1936, maybe beginning of 37.
And where?
I don't know. Someplace where people were happy.
Cheshire.
What country?
Poland.
Cheshire.
Do you happen to remember the name of the nanny?
No.
That's okay. Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
And this picture, can you tell us about it?
This is Robert Atlas, me. I would say I was about maybe 2 years old. And next to me is my grandmother on my father's side, Golda Atlas. And I'm guessing the age because nothing was written on the back, but that's my grandmother.
Do you know when or where it was taken?
Yes, it was in Rzeszów, and it's 1938, approximately.
And the country?
Poland.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
Please tell us about this picture.
Okay, this picture was taken probably outside of the ghetto during the war. I am the boy. I look like 4, 5, maybe, which means 1941, probably 41. The woman was a friend of my parents. It's interesting that she happened to have survived. I tried to get in touch with her. She lived in Wisconsin, and I got in touch with her daughter. I spoke with her daughter before she passed away. I never got a chance to speak to her. I'm sorry. I didn't get a chance to speak to her.
Her name?
I don't remember. I used to know it.
And do you know where it was taken?
It was taken in Rzeszów, Poland. 41, I said, 1941.
Okay, thank you.
3, 2, 1.
And this photo?
Okay, this photo was taken in 1946 KL means Klasa 3A, third grade. It was taken in Katowice, Poland. I am sitting way in the back next to the teacher, the woman. This was only boys. I'm sitting to her right. And the interesting thing, in 1946, Katowice, which is a town, pretty large size, and you can see the boy who sits way up front without shoes. So times were bad still.
And your name, sir?
Robert Atlas.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
Please tell us about this picture.
Okay. This is Robert Atlas, 1949, Paris, France. I was 49. I was about 13.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
Okay. This is the picture of my father on the left, Israel Atlas. I'm in the center, Robert Atlas, and my mother is on the right, Amelia Atlas. It was taken in 1950 in Paris, France. And 1950, I was, how old was I? 50, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. 14. I was 14. And we are dressed nicely, probably to send to, this picture was made so my parents could send it to the family in the United States.
Thank you. And this concludes the interview today.
Thank you.